team, this is George. We have a lot of layers in our communications and contracts project that's coming this week. And it's absolutely fantastic because we have three organizations in the game now with David Jimenez's case. We have the LTG, we have Dragon, and we have his um, course design organization that's involved too. So it's kind of interesting the way that this is approached. The whole case is about the lack of a needs analysis that was done, even though the company believes there was a needs analysis done because they did a beta test and came back with all the things that needed to be trained. But even in a beta test, that gives us some good data back, but it doesn't really often dig into the needs that the people may have. And we see this in this case here. Because if we take a look, David goes out to see the Lompoc technology team, LTG team, and finds out a lot of good information. And they actually used this tool for 2 months and abandoned it. So they utilized it for the beta test and then ran away from it. So that kind of gives you some good insight there in and of itself, because that's meaning that it didn't really work for them. Now, why didn't it work? Was it the tool? Was it the people? Was it the interface? What happened? So when he starts digging in and talking to the tech LTG team, he finds that it's used worldwide. So there's many different users of this, and a lot of the engineers in the LTG team simply don't trust it. So what does that tell us? That tells us we're going to have to get all that information from the beta test, but we're also going to have to hit that effective domain if in fact the technology does work. So it's kind of interesting how all this folds in. There's a lot of layers to the proverbial onion in this case. So let's look at some of our questions. I'll give kind of an overview. I know you are going to dive in much deeper than this short video. So David has to address that his client has predetermined training needs. So what communication strategies can David use to convince the client? Because you notice in the case, they kind of came to a compromise. And did David really go about this well or not? We don't know. Did he really negotiate to try to get that? Or did he just kind of throw it on the table and they came back and he said, okay, because they were a client? We don't know that because that part isn't detailed out. But that's where we can have a great discussion on how David could have approached it in a way that could have probably given him better results than what he did get. And in this, when we're talking about responsibility, that's a big deal because who is responsible for this? Is it the engineers in the field that tried it from LTG? Is it the way Dragon rolled it out? Who's at fault? Is it the beta test data that's at fault, not even a person? Is it the company that David works for because they didn't bid this contract with a needs analysis in there? So they won the contract without explicitly saying they're going to do a needs analysis. So whose fault is it? Who's responsible for it? And I have always found that responsibility of anything has many different players to it, but the only one that I can control is my responsibility. So that's very important to notice. So take ownership of that. So if David takes ownership of that needs analysis not being done, rather than throwing the responsibility anywhere else, he's going to come up with better communication strategies to overcome that lack of the needs analysis and find ways to actually get it done. That's what I've personally found when I've worked through problems much like this, because you rarely go into a project where somebody doesn't think they know what is needed. Whenever you go into a project, people often know what is needed, and that's without an analysis. That's just because they know. So you have to overcome this pretty much constantly. So with that, who is responsible? David, yes, has taken the responsibility. Is it his company? Is it the technology company? Is it LTG? Who has responsibility within those companies? That's an interesting question to kind of just bounce around within your teams as well. And then outline a plan that articulates what project management strategy David should implement to complete the project, how he should represent, how he should present client results to. Okay, I'm not going to try to read it. You can read it because obviously I'm not doing a good job. So, in other words, what it says in George language is, how should David uh, implement the project, and how should he show what's going on to his client? And this is where your model actually meets. So the theory and model that you use to design meets reality. That's where this happens in actuality. Um, what here's the question that I would answer. What is your client expecting? And if we look in our text, our client is expecting us to start building. Well, if we use an Addy model approach, even a Dick and Carey model approach, any approach like that, we're not going to jump in and start making stuff. How would you approach this? Is rapid prototyping the best sort of approach? Because you do have a loose set of an assessment that happened from your beta test. So as you're gathering your needs analysis on your end, can you actually be putting things somewhat loosely together with a rapid prototype model? Are things like that possible? How are you going to show your client that you're doing what they need? Because just because we think that we know what we need, you know what, our client does have the final say in that. So that's an interesting sort of approach. How are you going to approach that? Because it is possible to get fired from a project as a company. It is absolutely possible that they just say, no, we're done. So you have to balance all of those needs, and they're paying, your client's paying, so you need to balance it in their direction. So there is never balance. It is in their court for their needs, and you have to meet those needs. So that's kind of an interesting thing that happens in these projects. Let's take a look at one other thing here, if I can find it. I'll just paraphrase it because I can't. I was looking at when David was talking to the engineers from the technology team that built the software. They said that any training for engineers would basically be superfluous. So, in other words, we're working with attitudes on that engineering team as well, the software team as well, because they say we have this book. If an engineer doesn't understand it, it's basically their problem. But we have to work with attitudes. So you are working with the affective domain, or the emotional part of the brain, the amygdala, um, throughout this whole process. And the way to reach that is to get people to feel that they are getting an extreme value. So remember, you're not just dealing with facts and figures, you're dealing with the affective domain, or the emotional area of each and every person's brain, because they think they know what they want and they need. And if you step on that, you're going to um, basically hurt their feelings, in a lack of a better term. So what does that mean? You're going to bruise an ego. So you have to carefully work within to make them feel that they are getting a greater value. So have some fun with this and all the working around, and getting to a way that will deliver a great product for your client, even though they already know what they need. So you have to dive in and kind of play in that muddy area, because it is muddy and there is no 100% best answer. I know exactly what I would do, and it doesn't mean it would work. So that's why we have to get multiple perspectives. The way I would work my team, if I was in David's shoes, would be I would get my design team together, bat around a bunch of different ideas, be able to move forward with several different opportunities, and see kind of which ones plug in the best as I'm getting to know my client. So that would be my process. I would probably jump in with the rapid prototyping. Doesn't mean that it would work, doesn't mean that it's a good idea, just means that's the best way that I know how to move forward, because those are my tools. So you're going to be answering the same question from your tools and what you have learned the most and have experienced. So I hope this was helpful and didn't muddy the water too much. Have a fantastic week.